afternoon, everybody. Helen, please, yep.
Sure, good afternoon everybody, and just the usual safety announcements before we start. Just take note of the emergency exits at the back of the room as you came in. Just as usual, please observe silence. This is a meeting between the authority and the Garda Commissioner, so there won't be an opportunity to participate. If you do need assistance, there's a number of members of my team in the room, so just please ask. And if you need to leave the room, try to do it quietly. And then lastly, please everyone turn off the mobile phones so we don't affect the streaming. Thanks very much. Josephine.
Thank you, Helen. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Commissioner and your team. Our agenda for the meeting was published, and we'll begin in a few minutes with the Commissioner's report. But before doing that, Commissioner, I thought I might invite you to see, would you like to share anything with us about your recent visit to Pavey Point in the context of your diversity strategy?
Yes, well, thank you very much. And so, very regrettably, we had an incident which was illustrated in social media, and that's the subject of discipline investigation. So, and that still remains ongoing. But I think we acted appropriately, and again, that is in the public domain. Secondly, then, and subsequent to that, both Deputy John and I visited Pavey Point then on Monday. We were well received. We made our own apology for what had been portrayed on social media and the obvious hurt that had caused, and indeed the insult that had caused to members of the traveller community. But I have to say we were well received. It hadn't been our first visit to Pavey Point, and the previous relationship built up through Orla's department also held us in good stead as well in terms of relationship there. And with them we were able to work through, in effect, a process by which the individual Garda member involved also then visited Pavey Point and spoke with them, and indeed, as reported in the papers, offered an apology. So I think that's positive. It's very regrettable that the matter happened in the first place at all, but it is positive then that the member himself accepted his responsibility and acted appropriately in going to Pavey Point and offering his apology, and indeed listening to the concerns of the individuals there. So the matter still remains live as a discipline issue, and I know that DMR is actively engaged in that matter, and hopefully then we can bring that to pretty swift solution, because in effect it almost feels like we've entered into a restorative process with Pavey Point in respect of this, and hopefully then we can draw a line under this matter. I think on a wider point then, there's more that we want to do in terms of maintaining the relationship, but also then as we look forward and the launch of our own diversity and inclusion strategy next month, I'm also very mindful that we as an employer are offering almost 2,000 jobs, new jobs, and to new entrants to the organisation in the next 2 to 3 years, and we would really want to see the diversity of the organisation increase, and that obviously includes individuals from the traveller community joining and becoming either members or Garda staff within Garda Síochána, and all of that would be to the good.
Thank you for that. I think the authority would certainly share your view that the event should never have happened, but I think it is commendable that both yourself and the officer involved have apologised, and I think compared to some processes which take years and there's no apology at the end, I think it's commendable to both to yourself and to the officer that initiative was taken, and we welcome that in the authority, and we look forward obviously to a deeper engagement in relation to the diversity strategy in due course. I think the second item that it might be useful before we get into the agenda is to see, is there anything you'd like to say in terms of reassuring the community around Cavan arising from recent incidents? Now, I know you've spoken about it yesterday, so if you have nothing to add, that's fine. But I just thought I'd offer you that opportunity.
Yes, and I did speak yesterday about this matter, but I think there's some points just that I wish to re-emphasise. One, the investigation is ongoing, despite some commentary. It is well resourced and is not lacking of resources, and will have whatever resources that are required to carry through on what is a major investigation, both for ourselves and the Police Service of Northern Ireland. The Garda Síochána in Cavan are being supported by our national units in respect of the work that's ongoing, and we are getting assistance from the public, and that's good, and that is driving forward our inquiries, and there's still a lot of work to be done there in respect of bringing the perpetrators to justice. Even beyond that then, in terms of the policing of Cavan Monaghan, we've accelerated plans for an armed support unit in Cavan, and from Monday an armed support unit will be based in Cavan. It'll be initially staffed by individuals on temporary transfer, but we've supplemented the overall armed support unit complement so that there's sufficient strength to do that, and then in the next few months we will create an actual full-time permanent ASU presence in Cavan. And then at the end of November we've passed an out parade, and we've assigned then 20 members from that to Cavan Monaghan Division, and that's for the local chief superintendent to determine how they are used now.
If I'm recollecting correctly, you also appointed additional officers from the last intake. 20 isn't the totality of your response to that general part of the country? No, it's we have commenced and over the last 18 months to 2 years a steady build-up of resources in the border divisions. From 2 years ago, they've grown by 152 members, and yes, in the last graduation or passing out parade, there was an assignment to Louth in particular in respect of the critical issues that were happening around violent attacks in connection with a drugs gang feud. So that has happened, and those members assigned there have made a real difference in terms of the Garda presence in the streets of Drogheda, and that is to be welcomed. We're doing the same, but also then we've had ongoing concerns in respect of armed support unit coverage, and we're acting quickly to address that as well, and they will be in place from Monday. Clearly, the authority would join with all others in condemning what happened in the Cavan-Fermanagh area, and would encourage you to obviously pursue the offenders with all of the energy available to you, but also to continue to invest in reassuring the local community, because that's the other side of the piece. And we'll be talking later about community policing, but the community disquiet here is very visible and tangible, and so we just encourage you to continue to reassure and engage with the people in that area, as well as pursuing the criminal investigation. So thank you for that. And now we might move on with our agenda and begin with your monthly report to the authority, and the conversation on this is going to be led by Paul.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I have some questions to ask Commissioner in relation to the monthly reports. We have two of them, of course, at this meeting, covering the summer period. Before I get into the detail, I think it's important to acknowledge some of the successes that are outlined in both reports, and particularly around the courage and vigilance of a number of officers. Just wanted to mention two incidents. One is the rescue of a woman from the Liffey on the 26th of July by two officers from Pierce Street, one of whom, it appears, jumped into the river to rescue the woman. And also the vigilance of officers in Coolock, who on the 19th of August arrested a male suspect and recovered heroin to the value of €250,000. So I think the latter incident in particular illustrates the importance of a Garda presence in local communities, protecting local communities. I want to ask some questions to begin with in relation to an issue that you just touched upon, which is in relation to the diversity of the membership of Garda Síochána. Every month you provide us with figures that relate to the gender balance in the organisation, and I think in your August message you talked about attending an event to mark the 60th anniversary of the admission of women to the Guards. You rightly rightly noted the importance of that, but also acknowledged the distance that still had to go in terms of making Garda Síochána truly representative in gender terms of the community that it serves. And when you look at the figures that you've presented in the last couple of reports, I think the truth of that statement becomes all the more apparent. So overall, the figure at the moment, according to your figures, is 27% female. But that proportion reduces quite quickly on promotion, so 20% of members at sergeant rank or above, 11% at superintendent rank, yet at Garda level the percentage is around about 40%. So I suppose my first question is, can you outline some of the measures that are going to be taken to improve the gender balance at recruitment, but also, and possibly more importantly, at assignment and promotion?
Thank you. May I turn to Joe just in respect of the initial recruitment and promotion piece, please?
So the authority will be aware of the promotion or the recruitment campaign that we launched earlier this year, targeted around the strapline of the difference is you really trying to look out across all sectors of society to say that people can make a difference, and that trying to encourage people to think that if they believed that the organisation would only be welcoming of individuals from a traditional background, then we were looking at something very different. We haven't had the results yet of what impact that'll have, and it's certainly something that we look forward to receiving. But again, to say, I suppose, in that broader sense, that people can make a difference in the organisation, and we're very open and very welcoming of individuals who want to come and make the difference to Garda Síochána at large. I like to think that we can build on top of that strapline. I like to think that we can do more with it, and that's certainly something we'll be looking at when we get more data, richer data coming out of the recruitment process to date.
And may I also add that I think overall at the percentage that we are at, I think it is quite positive in terms of the European profile. In terms of the promotion opportunities, I would point to new development in terms of a network specifically for women within the organisation, and part of that is actually around the mentoring and advice that can be given to female members who are going forward for promotion or seeking to further diversify their career in some other specialism of itself. And beyond that then, I would also then point just to the increasing rigour of the promotion competitions that we have as well. Not just the ones that obviously that you run yourselves, but the rigour, increasing rigour in respect of our own, to make sure that inadvertently there is not in effect built-in discrimination in respect of composition of boards, etc., or the composition of the processes. And these are matters then that which will continue to develop, but we do acknowledge the disproportionate how that lowers down how that percentage decreases as you climb up through the organisation. I'm just wondering, is anyone you would want to add, just as being one of our two assistant commissioners and very visible in the organisation as well?
Commissioner, well, I suppose I have 36 years service in the organisation and have gone up through to reach Assistant Commissioner. Certainly, the Commissioner talks about a formal network being put in place. There has always been an informal network. I know I would have been mentored by more senior women in the job, and I would mentor people as well too. There's many variety of reasons. I mean, I've worked operationally throughout the organisation, so I see women who have maybe family. They do make a choice, quite a number of women, not to maybe go for promotion, because they know where they are at the moment, they know their hours, and it suits them for family reasons. And that's certainly one of the reasons. But I think that's changing, because obviously since the late 90s, huge numbers of females have come into the job, and there is much more critical mass, and I think that's important to have that mass of females being visible and present in the organisation.
Okay, I mean, I wonder that those comments are of course very welcome. But I'm just wondering, in terms of some specific measures, I mean, you talked earlier about the new diversity and inclusion strategy. Can we expect to see some particular measures in that to try to address some of the issues that I asked about?
Well, the diversity of the organisation is within that, and we are within that strategy. Then we would wish to see greater representation. So there will be actions that we will take from that, which will be delivered through then human resources. But I think it's one of the issues around this is just encouraging females in the first place to take that step, having a pool from which to draw upon, and at times the recruitment of females into the organisation has waxed and waned, and there's been surges, and then at other times there's been lulls in that recruitment. We have a far steadier recruitment of females into the organisation now. Any of the squads we have at the moment are sitting at about 40%, so that draws then a far greater ability then to draw on their talent. And in a couple of years' time, they'll be moving through the promotion processes as well. I think the recent innovation around a list for promotion expiring allows people then to reapply, and allows others then with less service not to be constantly sort of waiting for lists to expire over 2 to 3 years, and therefore then being held back, and then that allows people then to in effect progress quicker. So there's a variety of small things, and I would say a lot of them are already underway. The difficulty in some of this is in affecting the instantaneous change is very difficult. You're looking at a group of Garda and outsiders here, and it's taken us over 30 years to get to this position. So the changes that we wish to see are going to be over a considerable period of time. But if we put in the building blocks in place, then we can see those through. Like a police career is in the order of 30 odd years. So that's against. So we wouldn't want to say wait 30 years. I'm not suggesting that, but neither can it be turned around in 1 or 2 years.
I have to say you've slightly taken the wind out of my sails, because my final question on this was when can we expect to see some progress? But I think our hope and expectation, of course, would be that we'd see it in a much more ambitious time frame than that you set out.
Well, yes, very obviously, but that's within the constraints of how well an individual, just how quickly an individual can progress through our rank structure, as it is at the moment. There are alternatives in terms of direct entry, etc. But as it is at the moment, people can only progress so quickly. But we've done a lot actually to truncate that process as well.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that we had identified, and I think in fact we've had some conversations about this previously, is not just in relation to the recruitment, but in relation then to assignment, that's often critical in terms of then allowing a candidate to make the next step for promotion. Well,
I would say that we are reviewing the rosters, and an important part of the roster is around how much individuals can depend on that roster in terms of being knowing when they're going to be required on duty and when they're going to be off duty, and that's essential both for male and female members in terms of working through issues such as childcare. So we're very mindful in looking at what our new roster would be, that there is a good element of reliability in terms of knowing when you're going to be on, and predictability, and knowing when you're going to be on duty and not.
Okay, thank you. One of the other issues that, again, I think we regularly every month receive statistics from yourselves on is in relation to crime trends. And for a number of months, perhaps longer, we've welcomed the fact that in certain areas the trend is downwards. So in terms of, for instance, burglary and crimes against property. But unfortunately, it's also the case that for some significant time there's been an upward trajectory in relation to crimes against the person. And I noted that in the, I think in the August report, there was an indication of quite a significant jump, particularly in Dublin, a 16% jump in relation to crimes against the person. I'm just wondering, could you comment on that, both particularly, I suppose, the jump in Dublin and why that might be, and also more generally, what is underlying this trend upwards in relation to offences against the person?
John, could you take some of that, please?
increase in Dublin, if we go back maybe a couple of years, the increase in crimes against the person from our analysis of it is a summertime activity, and in the period that we're talking about here, the increases have been greatest in the Dublin metropolitan region. They relate to the night time activity, urban centres where there is increased evidence of consumption of alcohol, increased numbers in around these locations, and that has led, if you look to our statistics, it has led to an increase in the arrests for public order incidents, and it's also led to a number of increases in the number of crimes against the person, in particular minor and serious assaults. We have, over the past couple of years, we have introduced a specific nighttime operation working with the various different stakeholders in this area as to how we can reduce and minimise the opportunities for this. And we have, in the most recent past, just completed an organisation strategy in relation to crimes against the person, where we will look at this kind of from end to end, where we will look at that working with the other agencies on a more permanent basis and looking at it from a more strategic perspective. What we've done in the short term is we've looked to identify the hotspots where incidents are taking place, and we have put it in. There are a couple of points going on here, and I think one of this is about the responsible consumption of alcohol, and there is an obligation on everybody when they go out onto the streets and into these areas to behave in accordance with the law. And I think that's the first message that I would like to give out, is about the responsible consumption of alcohol. In addition to that, when we're out in these particular areas, there are obligations on Garda Síochána and other agencies, and we're working very closely with those to improve the locations where these people frequent very often as people go out there to socialise, and we want to make sure that they do so safely. So in particular in relation to the Dublin area, we've identified the locations, we've increased the patrols, we're working with the various other agencies involved, the local authorities, the licensed vintners, transport bodies, late night premises that they may attend afterwards.
Sorry, I think you said there that one of the factors explaining the increase is the fact that it was the summertime, is that right?
Yes.
But I mean, I stand to be corrected, but I think for the last at least year or 18 months, the figures that we have seen have been on an upward trajectory on a regular basis every month that we get the figures in relation to violence. Is that not right?
Yes, but there's
a specific jump over the summer, is there?
Correct,
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
There's a specific increase, and there's a specific increase what we find an increase in the consumption of alcohol in public places. So they go hand in hand. Then that's not an activity that would be we would encounter during the winter.
And so there is a sort of regional variation in your experience as well, is there?
Yes, and it would be, it's obviously the major urban centres, the busier centres where people frequent late at night, they're the ones that are the biggest increases in that particular area. While there are assaults across all communities, this is the area that we're noticing the biggest increase, and the one we're trying to target from a more strategic perspective. And
there is a note in the monthly report in relation to this graph showing an upward trend that future analysis is required to understand the drivers behind the. You seem to be suggesting that you've already done some. I had was, what will that analysis entail, and when can we see it?
Well, I think we will be able to share it very, very shortly. It's in the final stages of being completion, and we're in the phases now of looking as to what that would look like from an implementation perspective. So we have identified a lot of the reasons that you talked about, and we're looking at launching an assault strategy in the not too distant future, which will outline and address all of the issues that you talked about.
Because for the other point that the Commissioner made in the August report was, of course, to articulate the key mission of Garda Síochána, which is about keeping people safe. So this is really where it's at in relation to that mission, isn't that right?
That's correct, yes, and as John has referenced, there's an assault reduction strategy to be launched specifically then as we run into Christmas and again the nighttime economy. I don't think we're any different from the trends that we would see across Europe, and it does seem to be a connection between prosperity then and street assaults and nighttime economy type offences generally, and indeed also the consumption of illegal drugs and also regrettably then killed and seriously injured on the roads, and that disposable income does feed into a lot of the demand that we would have. So that would be a feature that one would see across other nations in Europe in particular.
Okay. Just a final point in relation to this issue. We noticed today that Women's Aid have produced a report in relation to domestic violence cases and the outcomes of those cases over a sort of 12-month period between May 18 and April 19. I'm not going to go into the detail of that, and obviously you probably haven't had a chance to digest that yet, but one of the issues that they encountered, one of the difficulties they encountered in trying to analyse the domestic violence cases was that they didn't appear to be disaggregated from general assaults. And I'm just wondering what progress you're making in identifying incidents of domestic violence as distinct from other assaults.
Well, if I can write back to you on that particular one, because there's progress to be made, but I haven't actually received an update on that. That was one of the specifics that we needed to do, and just in terms of our own protective services units and the analysis that we wanted to do for them around the extent of the demand that's being placed upon us around all forms of domestic abuse and domestic assault. So if I may take the opportunity to write back to you on that point. But I would also reiterate that we are investing in our protective services units under the new divisional model. They'll now be headed up, each of them will be headed up by a detective inspector, and all of the units that we've set up so far, they have been proved to be very effective, but also seem to increase reporting as well. And we can see that people become more aware of the service that we're providing, the enhanced service that we're providing, and indeed domestic abuse and offences of serious sexual assault are seeing upturns in respect of the amount of reporting, and it's very clear in terms of serious sexual assault the increase there's been in the last 10 years in terms of the amount of reports to Garda Síochána.
Thank you, because obviously that sort of disaggregation as well would be an important factor in the analysis of the upward trend in offences against the persons generally.
Yes.
So, okay, thanks for that. I'm okay for time. Okay. The final point then that I'm allowed to ask is in relation to the figures that you presented us with in the latest report, in relation to the signing of the Code of Ethics, training and signing of the Code of Ethics. And you'll appreciate obviously that this is a matter that we raise, I think, at every public and private meeting. You have reviewed the data underlying the numbers who have signed, and we welcome that, and it seems that the data that is now produced, I think we're being told, is a lot more robust than the data that we have received previously, and it does seem to suggest a more positive picture. However, having said that, I think from our point of view it's still a matter of some concern that when you look at the number of individual officers and staff who have signed up, there's still 1 in 5 officers who haven't signed the code, 2 in 5 Garda staff, and almost 4 in 5 of the reserves. And it's obvious, of course, that staff and reserves than regular officers. I suppose we have a sense of frustration that given the length of time that this matter has been under discussion, and given the public importance that you, Commissioner, and other senior officers have attached to this, that we're still not at a slightly better rate than that's been presented. and I just wondered, have you now given consideration to what specific steps will be taken to address those who are simply refusing to sign it?
Well, I haven't got to the position where I feel I need to compel people, and I think it would be wrong for actually, in the end, to compel an individual. Whether they sign this or not, they are still subject to discipline regulation within the organisation. What this signifies is that they themselves understand what our code of ethics is and seek to abide it. In effect, we have made it very difficult for an individual guard, and indeed a member of Garda staff, to proceed very far in the organisation, if at all, unless they have signed up to it. So if you haven't signed, as a bar to promotion, as a bar to specialist appointment. So I think those were significant steps, and certainly have had an impact in terms of individuals signing up to them. Beyond that, then, we have to consider that we've had an influx of personnel, particularly Garda staff, and so this is going to be ongoing work in terms of bringing in so many staff, and then in effect putting them through this process. We have invested really hugely in this training, and it is still disappointing that there's still so many Garda members in particular that have to be trained, because there was a focus on them. The Garda staff, I think there's some more understanding of that because of just the recruitment. The reserves is probably in some ways a reflection of attendance as well, and certainly those who are regular attenders have attended the workshops, and you can see that 82% signed that after attending the workshops. So there's still work to do, but at some point this has become business as usual, because the organisation continues to, in effect, change and continue to employ people, and we're going to have to find a way of this becoming business as usual. But as I've said, if you don't sign this, pretty much you're locked down into the role that you have, and I think that's sufficient incentive. I don't think really I want to get to the point where I'm saying to people they must sign this. We go through a process, and I think that would almost be counterproductive. What I do think I can say is they should attend the training and be subject to the training in whatever shape or form that might be.
Okay, thank you. Oh, right, okay. Well, yes, okay. Just one final matter. We see from the reports that work is ongoing to fulfil the commitment given by government to reopen 6 Garda stations. And I just wondered whether or not you would want to comment on the progress that's being made, and when do you think these stations might be operational?
John, can you help with
Yeah, sure. So I think we've provided the authority detail in relation to our projected opening dates for the stations concerned. So from memory, I'm just trying to find the page itself. From memory, I think Rush and Stepside will be opening back end of this quarter, the start of early next quarter, and the others will follow fairly quickly afterwards. There have been discussions with the relevant assistant commissioners, so if I take the 2 in Dublin, arrangements are in place for the stations to have a 24/7 presence. The actual opening hours that will be to the public will be an operational decision, primarily focused about the necessity to have a building accessible to the public for signing passport forms at 2 o'clock in the morning, for example. But in each case, there will be, in the case of those 2 Dublin stations, there would be a dedicated assigned unit into that space, working out of those locations and providing the services to keep the community safe in those individual areas. Obviously, some of the other locations are smaller, so if I think of Dunard, which has opened, the hours of opening that are very different, and they reflect, I suppose, the demands of the community. So it's very much about looking at the individual locations and working with the relevant chief superintendents around what those opening hours will end up being. So Boy, as we've said, is the still works required, won't be open until next year. There's some planning elements associated with that. Ballinspittle and County Cork, tender packages out there, contractors due in site later this year, and Loughlin Bridge and County Carlow. There's still ongoing discussions between ourselves and the Office of Public Works around when or what the design or what works are needed around those areas.
Thank you.
Thanks. Judith?
Thanks, Chair. I was struck by the conversation around gender diversity earlier, by the focus on sworn officers. And I just wanted to hear something from you about the focus on Garda staff, and that you weren't just concerned with those areas where women were underrepresented, but you were equally concerned about those areas where women were overrepresented. So, for example, if you look at your Garda staff numbers, there's 3 times as many women as there are men in the organisation, but the representation is very much focused at the lower grades in terms of Garda staff. So I'd like to hear something from you about support, mentoring and development of Garda staff to achieve their potential, and also the integration and inclusion of the wide diversity of their skills and backgrounds within the organisation.
Judith, thanks for the question. Maybe to start with, I don't think we're madly different to many other government departments with regard to the level of representation in the junior ranks. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, I'm just saying that's reflective. So it's not untypical of the circumstances which we find ourselves. I think there have been, if we look at the recent promotion competitions that we've had within the organisation to principal officer level, there's been a considerable success from women in those areas. So there are people who are coming through the process. But we can certainly do more from a systemic point of view, and I think the sort of areas that the AEC is referenced and the Commissioner's reference around Women's Network, that sort of process to encourage and present around that are hugely important. So people like Kate Mulcairns, who has attended here in the past, is a sign that there's a very much an opportunity for women within the organisation to develop and grow, and I think that's something that we would need to do. So it's about locking in the broader diversity processes for Garda staff alongside those that are equally relevant to Garda members.
So is there a systemic approach then to developing Garda staff?
Is there a systemic to developing women? Specifically, no, there's not, but it will fit within the context of our diversity strategy at large anyway. So has there been to date? No, there hasn't, but there will be as part of our broader diversity strategy approach.
Thank you, Chair. Can I take up a point with the Deputy Commissioner? Again, the issue that Paul was raising in relation to crimes against the person, and notably the disturbing increase in incidents in Dublin, and the Deputy Commissioner identified significant initiatives that you've been taking, identifying hotspots and engaging with various other organisations who may have a role to play in it. I would have expected that as a consequence of that the number of incidents would have been dropping, that if you've identified the key areas, I would have anticipated that the initiatives you've been taking would have been serving to reduce the number of been engaging with and dealing with, and that it is quite a recent initiative. But I'd be interested in terms of, since you've started those initiatives, what impact has that had?
Well, it has led to an increase in the number of arrests that have been happened under the Legislative Public Order Act. So in all of these cases, we take there are different strands to the approach that we take. Some of it is from an overt uniform perspective, where we try and prevent it. And the second element of that would be dealing with the incidents as they occur. And very often what you find over the years is that in the early stages, the number of incidents go up as you become more proactive, and it leads to a number of arrests, a number of incidents as you're more visible. And then over a period of time, you do expect that these incidents begin to reduce.
That's the detected incidents as opposed to the incidents?
That's across the whole range of incidents.
Okay.
As people become more aware, as we begin to improve the education around this, as we begin to improve the role and the involvement of the other agencies, as some of the practices change, like some of the areas where people congregate late at night, post event. Very often these are areas that create difficulties. So there's a number of strands to the approach that it takes, and it does take time for these, to be more effective.
This concerted approach. Sorry for interrupting you. This concerted approach, or cooperative approach, if I might use the term, has it been in place for a particular period of time, and is it one that is developing further as you identify other parties who may potentially have a positive contribution to addressing these issues?
Yes, constantly changing, it's constantly evolving, and some of the initiatives are probably at a further stage down the road than others. What I would say is that this approach that we have used it in other areas on previous occasions to some considerable success. So it's not that this is particularly new. It is a strategy and approach that we have used on previous occasions.
Successfully? Absolutely.
And I suppose what we're facing in this case is a steadier increase. And as the increase in consumption of alcohol and the increase in the number of people coming into these areas, that leads to an increase in the number of incidents happening. So it does take a little bit of time for the approach that we're talking about now to work through.
Yeah,
I think that's probably what we're seeing.
And it'll certainly be interesting on a regional basis to see what impact, notably that where the increase is of greatest significance, to see what impact it has. Can I ask a question on finances?
Sure.
You don't mind?
If I, before you conclude on that, the production strategy that the Commissioner talked about, it will be a national initiative, and that will bring a more kind of a holistic approach right across the entire country. Because while you mention one area, there are increases in a number of areas. So we are bringing a kind of a strategic approach across all of our regions.
And do we have a date for that?
Yes. We don't have a particular date for the commencement of it. It is in the final stages of completion in terms of developing the implementation plan, so we expect it very shortly.
As in before the end of the year?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Yeah, should be within the next month.
One item, and the area of finances, Commissioner, both in your report over the 2 months and also in terms of the reports of the media, have been issues of significant concern to you. You've identified the fact that the expenditure to date is something like 2.8 million beyond profile or above profile, and you've identified the fact that you've already had to take certain initiatives in relation to overtime, and also even in relation to a certain proposed capital expenditure.
Yes.
And the authority will be interested to know what type of impact that has had, and what type of steps you are taking to seek to ameliorate the organisational impact of that, because you were certainly at pains right from the very beginning of the year that you were going to keep within budget for the year.
And yes, and that's my responsibility as the accounting officer, and that has been reinforced to me throughout the year as well. So I think, as you say, this is the second time we've reported this situation. We ourselves decided on a degree of remedial action in July, which is in around prioritising some of the IT projects and also looking at some of the other capital expenditure, coupled then with the other area of particular control we have, which is overtime, which also has a knock-on into travel and subsistence. But also then there are various subheads such as vehicle storage, etc., where there are savings to be made. So it's been reported lately in respect of the controls placed in overtime. And we have placed controls in overtime, and in fact actually probably a more centralised control of it. There is overtime, but we're very conscious of just our financial position, but also reasonably foreseeable operational challenges before end of year.
You've used the term control or a cancellation of administrative overtime. I presume by that you're seeking to distinguish between that and operational overtime.
Well, even the operational overtime that we will seek to control that at the centre. So obviously overtime's requirement. Part of that we've no control over. 20 million of that is spent on a quarter-hour briefing time, which much grieves some of us in the organisation. It has to be said. But beyond that, then a considerable portion of our overtime is spent in and around court duties between attendance, escorts, and security. And in some ways, we're locked into that. So the discrete amount we have, which you could say is for proactive work or reacting to situations, is more limited than one might think, and that's why we've imposed these controls and measures to make sure we've proper sort of husbandry of it as we approach year end, and particularly against some of the challenges that we might face.
In terms of, and of course that's the reassurance the public would have, is that the consequence of you're seeking to manage and control the available monies to you for the end of the year, particularly in that area of overtime, that it doesn't impact on where there are significant issues that need to be addressed and that require quite resources from Garda, which will.
Well, exactly, and I think what we're seeking to do, what I'm seeking to do, is take prudent action against what may happen, and really reasonable action against what are reasonably foreseeable events, and therefore then a policing demand that will be placed upon us.
In terms of, finally, Chair, in terms of foreseeable demands, one of the issues that's got quite a bit of media attention was you're seeking from the government for reimbursement for the money that you spent on the President and Vice President visits. And from my perspective, I'm looking at the fact that something not dissimilar to that would appear to happen on an annual basis. You have a papal visit, you have significant football matches, various issues like that. And is this not into your budgetary process?
There's an argument for that, except it's difficult to see what some would set. In effect, you're setting aside for a rainy day that you don't actually know is going to happen on the 1st of January. And so sometimes events overtake you. Both of the presidential visits, the presidential and the vice presidential visit were unknown to us when we were going through the estimates process, or indeed on the 1st of January. And I think it's not reasonable either as an accounting officer, and in effect, to ask for money for a rainy day in the order of 15 to 18 million, because it just isn't overtime. It's there's travel and subsistence, lodging, meals, but also then capital expenditure on equipment, and these are considerable operations that we have to undertake, and we can't guess how many visits, or we may have no visits in 2020.
Just before we go off this item, can I just ask a follow-on question, or maybe as a comment, and if you want to take it away, about the material we received for this meeting is that only 64% of Garda staff have attended training. Now, I take your point that there have been some new, but that's a huge gap, and I'm curious to know, have they been afforded an opportunity to attend the training? Because if they haven't, then clearly, if they haven't signed, it's not their fault. But it's a very low proportion by contrast with the Garda members, 87 of whom have had training.
So, Chair, just to explain, if you look at the entry route for Garda members, they tend to come in block, come into Templemore together and together for that set period of time. So therefore there's a channel through which the process by which the Code of Ethics training naturally fits. In contrast, Garda members are coming in a dispersed fashion in small numbers in different locations around the country, and therefore that centralised process by which they can be brought together is very different. And that explains the major difference between the two. So has training been offered to them? Yes, but there's more to do, and again it's about numbers, and it's about pulling people together from around the country together into some fashion. We have been putting in place induction programs on a regional basis, but again the volumes that you need to make a cost-effective delivery are very different in small numbers, and that explains it. But we're very aware of the scale of difference. We're very aware of increasing that number quickly, and that's something that we'll do. I share the Commissioner's view earlier that we really have to put this into action in a far quicker way around the demand on our broader training resources. So I suspect that in relation to Garda members, Garda staff, that there'll be a far greater use of desk-based e-learning type options around this area in conjunction with other matters for the purposes of moving that matter on.
Judith has a follow-up on this specific
Yeah.
We've spoken before about the investment in training as between members and staff, and investment in performance management being a bit lopsided. So it's not just code of ethics, but that struck me. I mean, a lot of your Garda staff are clustered in big groups, so we might have a conversation offline as to whether whether this 64% is dispersed or if it's in certain parts of the country. But I don't have that data, so
no, I don't have it. But I'm pretty certain that it's more about the dispersion rather than the large centres. So Castlebar, or the two big centres in Thurles, I'm pretty sure have been well looked after. It's the smaller groups around the country where there is a divergence. But we can revert to more detail with the figures.
When we discussed the training requirement in the Code of Ethics Committee, as it was, we discussed the value of integrating police staff and a range of police disciplines within the training environment so that there could be an appreciation of the ethical issues facing different parts of the organisation at different levels. I would hate to think that you're now talking about separating police staff out, or Garda staff, into a somewhat lesser training offering or an offering that didn't even involve the opportunity to sit in the classroom and discuss ethical challenges with other members of the organisation. So I'm struggling to understand why, if you have a small number of police staff in various parts of the organisation, that they couldn't just be included with other ethics courses that are going on at the time for police officers.
No, and I hope I didn't, just be clear on what I was saying. It is easier to train large groups of people. The Garda members are coming in through Templemore, and the ethics training fits into their broader programme. And for that reason, it tends to be easier to deliver on that training. Absolutely, Judith. This multidiscipline training for elsewhere is what is going on around the country. So my only comment was that the recruitment channels for Garda members and Garda staff are different, and they bring about different challenges around the delivery of the particular types of training that's there. But I would completely support your view that multidisciplinary teams involved in training in these areas is what's needed.
I think we need to get below some of this to understand it better, and we'll have an engagement at official level between meetings and maybe then at committee. So thank you for that. I'd like to move on now to the Youth Diversion Programme agenda item, and obviously we had an extensive discussion about issues in relation to this programme at the beginning of the year, and since then there's been a significant amount of work done by you, and I'd like to thank you, Commissioner, for sending us the report done by Crowe, which effectively, to use your own language, checked your homework and made sure that assured you that the processes and that the assessment that had been done by your officers was to a high standard. So thank you for sending that to us. We do have some follow-on questions arising from our own work in that area. So Bob is going to lead first in that.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose the first thing is just to echo what the Chair has said now in relation to the substantive report itself. This is a report that was written in March of this year, and for a variety of reasons it is towards the end of September that we get the full unredacted version of the report. So some of what we want to look at today may be areas where we have travelled before, but I will try as far as possible not to go over old ground. This is, it seems to us, a good report, very comprehensive, very open. Almost every individual case was tracked down to identify its precise circumstances. There was no obfuscation, there was no overlooking of any of the elements in it. And some of the analysis of the circumstances and the reasons is significant, important, and will no doubt have great value within the organisation if it's taken seriously. As I have no doubt it will be, it most certainly should be. Perhaps the first thing to ask you, Commissioner, is where does the organisation stand now in its relationship with those victims of the offences which weren't pursued as a consequence of the issues that arise in this report? What's the relationship with them? To what extent are they fully aware? Are they satisfied with where things stand?
If I may turn to order there, because that's a specific part of the follow-up in respect to this, in respect to the contact with the victims, both individual and corporate, and then the response that we've had from them. Order, please.
The victim engagement, there was a group set up as part of AC Leahy's original working group on that, and they set up a National Crime Victims Helpline Desk, which was advertised when the report was published. Each division then also got, they were given packs, briefing packs to go to each of the victims that they had to engage with. Letters were sent out to people, phone calls were received, emails were received. The interaction with the National Victim Help Desk was 891 victims' letters, that was to organisations. 36 phone calls were received, 8 emails were received, and visits requests were 4. That was the national helpline. Obviously, at divisions, they had teams in each division who they established a victim impact assessment team, and each of the 28 divisions carried out a victim engagement process on behalf of Garda Síochána under the auspices of the internal review. Each victim of crime and youth offender emanating from that, those incidents subject to non-inclusion got a personal visit, a letter or a personal visit to them. Personal visits were considered for serious crimes. So a decision was made at that level, at the divisional level, whether the serious crime whether should get a personal visit as opposed to just a letter in the post. Each letter contained an apology on behalf of Garda Síochána, accompanied by a victim information leaflet, which was designed by the National Protective Services Bureau in conjunction with the Victim Assessment Impact Group. Divisional victim impact teams were tasked with dispatching the letters to the relevant parties and to identify any incidents that required victims of crime to get a visit. So I suppose to give you some stats, 6,239 letters were issued to victims of juvenile crime and youth offender victims and or parents or guardians who were also treated as victims. 891 letters issued to commercial organisations, and 135 personal visits to victims of serious crime incidents were conducted by divisional teams, and 117 communications, that was either telephone calls or emails, were received from members of the public at Garda divisional victims' offices. So that's.
And how would you characterise, or how can you characterise the responses, the attitudes of those people with whom you engaged when this was made known to them?
I think that, well, the feedback I've received, particularly from the superintendents and the teams that have been engaged in this, is one, for some people this incident had happened several years ago, and by and large their life had moved on, and our contact with them was then in the context of, well, thank you for letting me know, but that matter's dealt with. But you can see actually just from the statistics that Orla provided that there were relatively limited circumstances where there was a considerable anguish shown, and those were then dealt with. We were careful about how we communicated with people, either be it in writing or making that personal contact. And I think that made the difference in terms of going out and providing a personal explanation. Bearing in mind that that had been subject of commentary here and the subject of presentation here, so for some people it wasn't new. I don't think I heard of a sort of situations where it was completely fresh to anyone, where there were more serious incidents. So I think just a methodical way that Paddy and Leonora have gone about this has actually paid dividends, because a major part of this was repairing any damage that might have done in public confidence, particularly with victims. And I think by and large, the process undertaken has succeeded in the majority of cases of doing that.
Very good. No, and it is impressive, the range of contacts that were made. The second issue, which was obviously the two most significant elements in this, were the victims in the first instance, and secondly, the then children, the young people who were involved and who, by any standards, lost opportunity either to be deterred from subsequent criminal activity or to be removed from the possibility of engaging in subsequent criminal activity. And you, I think, got some adverse reaction a number of months ago when you talked about or spoke in terms of expression of regret to those young people for what had happened. But one of the very striking things from the report is the acute vulnerability of these young people that's displayed in the way the report analyses them, and the extraordinarily higher level of mortality rates that these children had relative to the rest of the population. It is striking that more than 100 of these children had died, some of them in their teens and others in their 20s. And it raises the question as to whether that has had any impact or influence on the way the Garda Síochána thinks now in terms of children and addresses itself to children in the overall scheme of things. Yes, it's true that many of these young people with whom these cases weren't pursued offended again, and some of them offended many times again. But the extraordinarily vulnerable nature of their lives is very clearly outlined in this report.
Well, I think what's very clear from this, and when you look at the young people that come in contact with us, and to think that they'd already been in the youth diversion process and subsequently had re-entered it, and many of them on multiple occasions, that it is very clear, as well as being at times the perpetrators of crimes, a lot of crime was also perpetrated against them as well. So they were very often the victims of pretty serious crimes and indeed very serious offences. And that is clear. And I think from our perspective, the work that we've undertaken on covering this and reporting this, and then the fresh focus that we've applied to this, has been important in trying just to re-establish the importance of the whole youth diversion process. It is a good process. It's internationally recognised as such, and we are pleased to be able to, in effect, almost like relaunch it through this process. Now, this is not the circumstances under which you'd want to relaunch anything, but at the same time, we've taken what is a crisis and then applied ourselves properly to it. It is now a national bureau. It's headed up by a chief superintendent. There's further resourcing issues that certainly we still have to resolve, but things are underway. We know that the pulse changes that we made in response to the inspector's report resolved some of the systemic issues, and now there's just then, I think, the piece about how we deal with young people, and it's not just the responsibility of the Youth Diversion Office, but the other work that Orla undertakes in respect of developing community policing is another essential element in respect of this. And the crime which happens in our society does impact on some groups to an extremely disproportionate fashion, and these young people are illustrative of that. They come from certain social strata and chaotic lives, and indeed then sometimes abuse alcohol or drugs, and all of those things combine to increase their vulnerability, and indeed the likelihood they will be victims of crime, or indeed very serious offenders,
Increased.
indeed mortality.
You know, what you said is absolutely correct, but it does reinforce and emphasise the significance of that engagement between not just this group of young people, but children and young people generally, and the sensitivity to those issues. One of the things that emerged in this report was the extent to which the work of the Youth Diversion Office was not taken as seriously as other areas of activity, the extent to which this was simply about young people who probably weren't highly regarded anyway, and reflected to a certain extent at least in the fact that the existence of youth diversion, the engagement of Gardaí with it, was not part of the syllabus of the training of Gardaí in the Garda College, and that the offline, as it were, sessions that the Youth Diversion Office had in the training college were not compulsory and therefore were not attended by everybody, and that for many their first encounter with this reality was when they found themselves engaging with an offence for which they believed the suspected offender was a child. It takes more than appointing a chief superintendent and increasing the staff to change that perception within the organisation. And I wonder whether you have thoughts on how, in addition to doing those important things that you've done in relation to strengthening the Youth Diversion Office, you can turn that perception around to ensure that issues that involve children will be taken as seriously as those that involve adults, more seriously perhaps in certain circumstances, and that nobody will ever think again that the Youth Diversion Office is a less important area, or a juvenile liaison officer is a less important role to have to play in the organisation.
Well, I think in our analysis of this, we identified, the how and why of how this happened, and to the full extent that we could, and it extends to some, I would say, 43 points, and I've received then, in fact, commentary in respect of each of those 43 points, and a lot of the issues that are identified as being among the causal factors of this have been addressed. There is still issues, I would say, that I'd want to see further work done around in terms of training. Training is provided to newly promoted sergeants. Training is also provided through an e-learning portal, but the training at Templemore for the probationer or trainee Gardaí has still to be implemented, and I wasn't aware of that until the last few weeks, so we'll want to see that being put onto the syllabus. I'd also highlight then that in effect, and I think in part in the years of austerity, some of the staffing around this in terms of sergeants and guards actually as youth diversion officers, that had drifted as well. Within the new divisional structure, we will be able to in effect be certain then across the 19 divisions, and this is part of one of the building blocks of the 19 divisions about the standards that we expect around youth diversion. As I say, it is very successful for 2/3 of the children who come into this. We don't see them again, and there are, in even that third who do come back, there are good returns in terms of dealing with those individuals as well. So we don't want to lose something here, and we want to make sure that we reinvigorate it. That's been done. There's some work still yet to be done. The pulse fixes, the further pulse fixes that we require are still some time off, and that's just a product of the amount of work we have ongoing within the pulse system itself in terms of updates.
The report, as you say, tried to identify some of the reasons why all of this happened, and clearly the transition from a paper to an electronic to a pulse system played a part. But one wonders where the professional curiosity, professional attention of individual guards was that a system that worked apparently better when it was paper-based suddenly went out of sight when it became electronic. And one of the things that was absent, strikingly so for me, in the list of causes was the issue of personal responsibility. And the report says in one significant line, but it doesn't elaborate, that some Garda members simply didn't do their jobs. And it also identifies the observations that were made that nobody was watching. And it seems to me, if ever there was an expression of the reason why a code of ethics is an important thing, and why embedding it and making it part of the lived experience of everybody in the Garda Síochána is important, is precisely that. That sense that because nobody was watching, things didn't get done.
Well, accept the point you make. I think that line in respect of, and some people just didn't do their jobs, is why we entered into the discipline process. That we wanted to explore that and see what happened. We are well through that, and you've received some of the statistics in respect of that. And the code of ethics is important here, but I also think that the introduction of new systems and processes and the risk assessment of those should have been more carefully managed in respect of, well, what are the risks of applying this process to pulse and what's going to happen, and that didn't happen in this case. And I can only say in mitigation that this was introduced in the middle of austerity, and those who should have had a professional curiosity, sergeants and inspectors as well, well, they were becoming thinner on the ground too, and this is a particular snapshot in time for the organisation, which was by and large repaired whenever the inspector issued their report, and the changes to pulse at 6.8 and 7.3 by and large resolved this, because then in effect a feedback loop was
automatic
introduced.
loops.
So we're revisiting obviously the discipline issues and around that, but for those who have not done their job and plainly haven't done their job, then we have a discipline process ongoing.
I'll come back to that as a concluding question, Commissioner, if I may, but there are two others, Chair, if just before I finish. The first is, as the report identifies, there wasn't a framework of accountability. And as you move forward with a strengthened youth diversion office, and particularly as you move into the new operating model, about which you'll speak in a moment, with the new divisional structure, do you see clearly how a framework of accountability will be incorporated into that new set of structural arrangements that will overcome the problems that this report highlighted?
Well, one of the rationales around fewer divisions, 19 divisions, and moving in particular from 124 administrative units to 19 administrative units, is that we can have a far greater view of the process and systems within the organisation. So in this instance, both the investigating member, district office as it is at the moment, but also the PAF administrator are aware of a child may be unsuitable for the diversion process. So that's resolved in that way at the moment. But we want to move to rather than modernise antiquated procedures, want to be sure going forward that our procedures are a little less cumbersome, more slick and more process orientated. And then part of the divisional structure is then also around the accountability of this and standardising the quality of our service provision right across the organisation. This is an obvious area, and it provides an example, I think in this case, of some of the difficulty of defining our process. The process map for this is very considerable because there are so many decision points and actors within those decision points as well, and that's what we need to clarify. And we have that. That's a huge undertaking actually in introducing a new operating model. But one of the benefits I see from the new operating model is we're moving from 125 administrative units who may have had a hand in this to 19, and then those 19 having a thorough grip on all the various processes. So you could take youth diversion, but also then cases which aren't dealt with to conclusion. For example, we've a far better process. Investigation management system will help with this, and the PAF administrators having access to this and an understanding of what investigations are ongoing and where they are also would be significant in this, Bob. So a lot of this is about new ICT systems we're introducing and reaping the benefits of the management information we'll get from those.
Yeah. This is the second report in a row that identified the issue of organisational lack of awareness, I think a lack of awareness of individuals within the organisation, widespread, of some of the detail or some of the important central points of directives or of even the law. And while recognising that it takes heroic qualities to keep up to date with all of the directives, instructions that emanate from headquarters, it seems there is an issue about the extent to which people can keep up to date with them. And I wonder whether in the implementation plan that you have, that is something, it's broader than this, of course, that might be looked at. And on that implementation issue more generally, we didn't have an opportunity to consider the update on the progress of the implementation plan, which only came to us last night. But looking at the plan as it was identified in March in this report, three things, I suppose. One, it makes me wonder to what extent the Youth Diversion Office was involved in the setting out of that implementation plan, how deeply it was consulted with, I don't know. The second is the commendable ambition of the plan, but thirdly, the real challenge of getting it all done with the available resources within the timescale that's identified, and whether this is an issue of overpromising with the risk of under-delivering, without wishing to suppress any momentum in relation to this particular development.
Or I can ask you to touch on
The implementation plan had been put together before I arrived in that particular section, but the implementation plan, we've put together a working group in GUIDB under Chief Superintendent Quinn, and they are working towards achieving all of those. She's gone out and done, in relation to the knowledge of the whole juvenile system, she has gone out and done road shows, I suppose for want of a better word, across the regions. They have people in the Juvenile Diversion Office who are dedicated to dealing with specific divisions, so they build up a relationship with the people who are working with that, the PAF administrators and the people in the district office. They send out reports every month for the UTCOs, the unsuitable discase only, which led to a lot of the issues subject to the report, the original report. They have sent out infographics to people, kind of a ready reckoner, and both to them but also to the people in GISC, so that when people are putting incidents on Pulse, that they know the questions to ask to identify the correct process. They are also have issued one standard operating process or procedure at the moment out to the various divisions in relation to dealing with those, but they have a number on stream, coming on stream as well too, to go out to do that. Training, as the Commissioner said, is being delivered at the Sergeant's promotion course, but the e-learning that was put together, just slightly under 8,000 have completed that e-learning programme already in the organisation, and I have spoken to them in the Youth Diversion Office, and they would say that the files coming into them are improving in relation to the skeleton file, and that a prima facie case has been established in relation to whether a crime has been committed or not, because that was an issue that was highlighted in the other report as well. So we're moving along. There's a huge amount of stuff in it. Some of it is more long-term. The Commissioner spoke with the IT, and we have an assistant principal who's working with the IT section, putting together, mapping the process and trying to design an end-to-end IT solution for the youth referrals, which should address many of the issues that made things fall between the cracks before that.
Thank you. Well, that's
I suppose in order just to
helpful.
maintain the focus on this, Crow and at the very end of their report do suggest a revisit of this, and I think that's something that we would be open to, because it is complicated. It is complex. There's a huge amount of process in this, and I think there's just generally learning for us in terms of, as an organisation, how we deal and try and find our way through some of the bureaucracy which exists within the organisation, but also then around this particular instance that we continue to be on track with it. And just the broader point you asked about training, for substantial numbers of the organisation to come together and deliver a training package is expensive. We have extensive commitments when one looks at the RDMS system and the investigation management system alone, never mind just keeping, we're considering how best we can use the overlaps that we have, in that we have a 5-unit roster system, to try and maximise playing time and more inexpensive time, so to say, rather than overtime for training purposes.
No, that makes eminent sense. And the final point, Chair, is to return briefly to the question of the disciplinary issue to which the Commissioner referred earlier. I think we are impressed by the fact that these issues have been taken under consideration in the context of whether disciplinary issues arise. It's an important response to the scale of the problems that were identified at the time and that are outlined with such clarity in the report. And the information that we got yesterday gives some indication of the way in which this is being or has been dealt with, but not so much as enables no precisely whether something is being contemplated. There's a number of divisions where the work is still in progress in relation to reviewing the files that were concerned, and we look forward to getting the complete report in terms of when all divisions' information have been provided, but also perhaps a greater sense of clarity as to what has been proposed and what may have been imposed. But one of the things that emerges clearly is that in some divisions where an individual Garda had one referral that wasn't followed up, and one should make the point, just for completeness, that half of the cases involved an individual guard having just one referral that wasn't brought to a conclusion. I think that's an important consideration in terms of looking at the overall scale of the issue as it became clear when it was investigated by the organisation. But that in some cases, a Garda member who had one referral appears to have had a disciplinary penalty either proposed or imposed, and in other divisions, a Garda member with a single referral that wasn't pursued hasn't had a penalty imposed. It may be that the severity of the original offence is the deciding element. We don't know, but, and we've touched upon this in our meeting earlier, there is, it would appear, a risk of inconsistency of outcome for the Garda members concerned, depending on what part of the country they're in.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to, Dave, here just explain the discipline process and just there's some vagaries of our discipline process around how we delegate responsibility to divisional officers, chief superintendents, and the limitations and the advice that we can provide. So I've asked Dave to touch on those, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The issue around the discipline part of it is that it's a delegated function. So the function is actually delegated down to the Chief Superintendent. It is governed by case law thereafter in respect of that. We cannot impose or, shall we say, interfere with the discretionable authority of the delegated officer. And that is a particular function that has caused us some difficulty in respect of the consistency of approach. As a result of, and not as a result of that, but as a result of the Charter report and a few other more reports, particularly around the future policing of Ireland, we are currently conducting a literally head-to-toe review of the discipline process, and within that discipline process we are looking at how we can eliminate that level of inconsistency that's currently in the present system, and whether or not we should be looking at a centralised model versus a decentralised model if you take it in the context of trying to delegate the function down the value chain. And in addition to that as well, what we're looking at it then is how do we look at it from the point of view, are some of these performance-related matters or are the discipline-related matters at all? So there's a huge body of work that's going on behind the scenes which is not really going to impact on this particular function to see what the level of inconsistencies were. You know, if you take a particular case without knowing the background of each case, it's very hard to say whether one was inconsistent with the other or not. And what I've asked in my department to do is to talk to our GPSU unit with a view to going in and looking at that particular process in respect of these, to give me some assurance in respect of the fact that a number of cases that we've said that were dealt with where there was nothing to see here, why was that the case, and have a look at that, and then other ones then where there was a fine maybe imposed in some cases and in other cases it was only dealt with by way of advice or warning, and as to what's the process and the rationale around that. Now we gave good guidance in respect of we wanted to know what the rationale was for making the decision in the first place, and also the rationale then for the sanction that was to be imposed. So we're looking at that in a holistic point of view in the current review of the regulations, but also to give certain assurances that everybody's been treated fairly within the current system as it is.
Well, good, thank you for that. I mean, the authority has statutory obligations in relation to, or statutory function in relation to keeping itself informed and reviewing disciplinary matters, and that's something with which we have been engaged to, and there have been a variety of discussions with you, Commissioner, as you know, because it's an important satisfaction as to the fairness of any system is a critical element of people's acceptance of it. But it was an important development that in this instance of something which was of such significance, so widespread across the organisation, that consideration was given on a universal basis to whether or not disciplinary action was necessary. That was significant. I think that's it, Chair, as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
I have just one or two follow-ups on the same point. I mean, Commissioner, you know that we're struggling to understand. This is the second issue where we've been concerned. The previous one was the breath tests, that the imposition of disciplinary action should have some coherence across the organisation, and we raised that matter at the time with the Commissioner. And we are struggling to understand, you know this from our private session, why, notwithstanding a delegated system, there can't be some framework put around it. And we'll talk again, I think, about that, because we certainly are struggling to understand why you can't put a framework around it that would ensure a degree of consistency for the same offences. But the other thing I'm struggling with at the minute is the data we received last night on the discipline, and maybe Dave or Commissioner, maybe you could help me. I'm using round numbers,
okay,
because it's easier. There's about 8,500 cases.
Yep.
And when we first discussed this, there was about 3,500 officers, guards involved, that were going to be looked at from the point of view of discipline. You have decided, or it has been decided, in 4,500 cases, in round numbers, that there's no disciplinary issues arise. How many guards is that? Because I can't find it in the numbers, but we did get them late and maybe it's not here. because I can establish from the numbers that 462 guards were actually disciplined.
Yes.
Made up of 448 for minor, Regulation 10, and 14 for Regulation 14, and none for serious. So that number is clear. But I can't find a number for how many you've actually examined and said. So I'm trying to figure out how many of the 3,500 officers, not cases, are still in place. Do you understand my
No, I
the
understand
point?
because it's not hindered.
No, it's not. Well, thank you. But if we'd gotten it on time, we could have gone back to you. So I really do want to register that we got that very late.
Well, in fairness now, in respect of this, they were working at this up until particularly over the weekend, because there were some divisions we didn't have the necessary data in respect of it, and we didn't want to.
Now we know how we feel.
I know, I accept that, but we didn't want to be coming back to you with data that was incomplete. In addition to that, and just to clarify one particular matter, is that we gave you data in in May of this year, and it included the figures for 2018, which I know they're small and all of that, which affects, because the report talks about the data from 2010 to 2017. And just in case that may have thrown the authority, I just want to clear that the figures that you have in this report covers the scope of the review itself, so 2010 to 2017.
So with the round numbers, by using round numbers, we're still...
There's about little over 3,000 that are still waiting determination by division officers. And
that's the second part of my question. There's a serious, well, it seems to me anyway, a significant imbalance across divisions in making progress. And I'm wondering, it may well be that there are people absent, or that they're particularly busy divisions, but I just want to be sure that it's not a lack of application. Like there are parts of the country where cases are disposed of, for either positively or not, but there are others where there's big numbers, like 3 figures.
Yeah,
a couple of hundred.
Correct. And
still kind of awaiting. And I'm concerned whether that's a kind of a way of avoiding decisions.
No, it's not. What happened I'm aware of 2 particular cases where there's change of personnel, and I didn't copy quick enough, and I'll take that one on. But I have addressed it with the remaining ones that are outstanding. I've addressed it.
Because it's another part of the consistency question.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've addressed that with each individual chief superintendent, and I have more or less indicated that in the report here that November was my deadline. Now, I already had given a deadline for this meeting, but unfortunately with the volume that was there, it just needs to be done and done properly. I prefer to see it done properly rather than done in an ad hoc basis or inconsistently.
Well, if you could tidy this table you gave us yesterday up so that I can see how many people,
yeah, okay.
Not just cases. Because I do know how many were disciplined, but I don't know how many were examined and found not to have an issue. And it's important because we put it a big number in the public domain that there were 3,500 guards that were going to have to be asked questions. Now, if it's, if 3,000 of those have, that's a big important question for community confidence. Yeah. Whereas if it's only 300, it's a different question for community confidence. So it's the officer numbers will actually help us here rather than cases. So thank you for that, and I look forward to getting that from you. I now need to move on, because we're going to be so seriously out of time, to the operating model piece. Commissioner, you've briefed the authority extensively on more than one occasion in committee about the operating model, but considering the extent of public interest in it, I think we both agree there was an opportunity for you to present your thinking in relation to the operating model to a wider audience. So if you, I know, and I imagine, and we know you're going to have a presentation and people will be able to see it. So if I could ask you to be as succinct as possible, and then colleagues may have a question or two, but we have had an opportunity to ask you lots of questions. So don't be surprised if there's limited questioning. It's not lack of interest.
Well, if I might say, we do have a presentation on this, and so and just in the interest of time, I'll also keep my comments brief. This in effect flows from a couple of documents and indeed the observations of the authority and the observations of the Oireachtas Committee as well. If we look to the Inspectorate, the Commission on Future of Policing, government has accepted that and is now a policing service for the future, and the implementation of that is overseen by the Office of the Taoiseach. Part of that was then to restructure the organisation. In doing so, we have consulted widely within the organisation. This was flagged up on numerous occasions to our Commissioners' Conference, but also was flagged up at the AGM of the associations as well. We've been engaging in developing what was initially known as the district policing model, and that's been a couple of years' work flowing from the modernisation and renewal programme. So there's been a lot of conversation about the restructuring of the organisation. In doing so, I set down some parameters in which to try and take this forward. One, I wanted, and I had no preset number of divisions, but I wanted divisions to be of a sufficient size that they would be operationally autonomous, that we would in effect have a division which had sufficient resources to be able to provide a bespoke local service, while at the same time have sufficient specialism and expertise, so that in effect there wasn't an air code or county lottery as to what service a member of the public would receive. And I'm thinking of particular things like protective services, that each of the new divisions will have a detective superintendent, that there will be a localised economic crime bureau, that we would have an inspector and one of the community engagement looking after roads policing. And also then, we are still at a period of growth. We are at approximately 14,200 Garda members. We're to grow to 15,000, and furthermore then we have another 1,250 Garda staff to employ, but 1,000 of those depend on us identifying positions where they can displace Garda members out to the front line. And as I said to you earlier in the presentation, earlier today, we are reducing 124 administrative units to 19, and in doing so then we want to address our processes, which are burdensome. We do spend a lot of time on internal bureaucracy and on the systems that we've imposed upon ourselves, and that's a huge internal demand, and we want to diminish that. And all of this is about making sure that every euro that we get, that we maximise the amount, the funds and the resources that we get towards the policing impact that we seek to deliver through the delivery of the annual policing plan. And so a lot of the focus has been on the divisions. There's also part of this is also in respect of the national functions and the headquarters functions, how those national functions then support the divisions, and indeed how the headquarters units support the divisions. So we're trying to in effect invert the model almost of the organisation, where the division becomes a primary unit by which policing is delivered. Other units then fall in behind that in support in terms of the national units, the regional units, and indeed headquarters, and that at a local level policing is delivered which is bespoke to the needs of the local community. And we are commencing the implementation process. This is quite complex because we have to unpick some of our financial recording methods. A lot of our ICT has been built up on a divisional structure. That has to be unpicked. We have to process map how we actually deal with things, and we've talked at length about youth diversion, for instance, but at the same time introducing a new structure and new ICT systems which will provide us more management information. So, as I've said often before, certainly planning to my own staff, this is a time of great endeavour for the organisation. We've been charged with implementing very, very significant change, and to do that we need to build some momentum and really show that to the organisation and to the public that we mean business and that we're getting on with this. And really we've just started on the first few steps of that, and if I turn to Mick can set out quickly where we are at this moment in time, and then we can discuss what comes next.
Yeah, Chair, I have a brief presentation which I will go through very quickly because the Commissioner has probably touched on many aspects of it. I'm sure if you have it there in your pack. Just to put in context, I suppose it is part of it is in keeping with our strategy for the next 2 years, where we talk about our 4 main pillars being about protecting people, protecting communities, protecting the state's security, but transforming our service is one of the key areas which we have embarked on over the next 4 years. So the operating model will obviously be a key part of that as we over the next 3 years. So it's fit into our overall strategy. So why are we changing? Commissioner alluded to it in terms of society is changing, crime is changing, yet our organisation has, I suppose, remained relatively static in terms of the structure over the last 100 years. So I suppose it's a very appropriate time, given the considerable investment the government is making in policing, that we would look at the opportunity now to restructure, bearing in mind, I suppose, what we've identified ourselves within the organisation and the reports that the Commissioner alluded to there in terms of the Commission for the Future of Policing Environment, which I suppose in many senses set out the blueprint for policing for the next number of years. So what we're doing in terms of the operating model is very much keeping with those reports and the Commission's report itself, as well as I suppose, what we've identified within our own organisation, and indeed what you've identified yourselves as a policing authority in terms of where we need to bolster up our structures internally, as well as our engagement with the community. So there are some of the drivers behind our new operating model. And what we are setting out to achieve is ultimately to improve our services, our structures, our processes, so that we give a better service to the public. And indeed, our operating model is really about transforming the organisation and moving from what the Commissioner alluded to, having a very siloed administrative function footprint right across the organisation with over 96 districts and 28 divisions, to streamline that down into a more efficient service that's more bespoke to local communities. So what in essence we have done in terms of policing, we said the divisions will now be the methodology where we would deliver frontline policing, and everything else we do within the organisation should be and will be about supporting those divisions, giving that local bespoke policing service to communities. So that's the main driver behind in terms of what we're doing, and as I said, very much guided by the policing service for the future. So we're changing what we do, how we do it, where we do it, and who will be doing it for us, in the context of moving from that structure of, let's say, the divisions, from district to the divisional model. So there will be some changes. Yes, we're going to have larger divisions. The logic behind that is that each of our divisions now will have a command somewhere between 600 to 800 personnel. So each division will have the capacity, the skills to deliver local policing service, a wider variety of local policing services to cater for demands of local communities. So by giving each of those divisions, or making them of the size where they have the capacity to deliver that range of services across the divisions, is one of the driving forces in terms of making those divisions larger across the country. And as you would see from the map that we'll have later on, that the divisional structure, what that's going to look like. So each division will be larger, will have greater capabilities, and will be more focused on delivering local policing services locally. I think that has to be the essence of it in terms of what we're doing. You know, if we don't deliver that locally, if we don't make that connection with local communities, and they see the value of what we're doing, then I think we won't have achieved our objective in that regard. So larger divisions, more frontline Gardaí, and we'll be achieving that by recruiting more Gardaí. Commissioner alluded to, you will see a net increase of 800 Gardaí over the next 2 years, a total of 1,500 recruited to keep pace with retirements, etc. But that will be an extra 1,500 new Gardaí come into the Garda College. That on top of the additional 1,200 Garda personnel, Garda staff, which we'll be recruiting, which in essence will allow us to deploy a further 1,000 people back to operational frontline policing. So between the net 800 extra Gardaí recruiting, the 1,000 Gardaí that we will be able to redeploy as a result of Garda staff being brought into the organisation, you know, we should see a significant increase in frontline Gardaí across the wide range of policing services. And our focus will be on community policing and making sure that we deliver to the most vulnerable people within our community. So more frontline Gardaí, larger divisions, and by enabling our local divisions to do more, in essence, we will free our national units to specialise on the more complex, sensitive, high-profile cases. For example, the work we've seen by our drugs and organised crime units, our armed support units, which we have already put in place across the country, and additional ones today that the Commissioner mentioned that we'll be deploying in Cavan and across the border region. So, in essence,
By enabling local divisions do more, we can free our national units, the specialist units, to focus more, as I say, on those more complex cases and to work on, for example, our protected services units and working on the more complex cases like the human trafficking, drug trafficking, etc. that takes place across the organisation. So enabling our local services to do more will in effect allow our national services, specialist units, to deliver more focused services and to deal with some of the complexities that we've had earlier on this year, for example, up in the Loud Division or what we've had more recently in the Cavan Division. So there will be a knock-on effect in that regard. In addition, we'd say the other dimension to it, the fourth dimension to it, is about improving performance. And across the organisation, you will see that in many respects. Just touching on what we alluded to in terms of the youth diversion, we will have a dedicated superintendent in each of those Garda divisions who will be looking after governance and performance, so that the lessons that we've learned in terms of the mistakes we made, that we will ensure that we will pick up on those things. So we recognise that we do need to strengthen our governance, and in that context we have recruited we've promoted an extra 172 inspectors, over 400 sergeants, so we get our frontline people, and we have a lot of young people in the organisation, so they have the support that will allow them to do their job and to guide them along and make sure that we don't repeat some of the mistakes we did in the past. So within the organisation, we will, from top to bottom, we will have a Deputy Commissioner, but making sure the whole transformation programme will be delivered right across the organisation. The performance dimension will ensure that from top to bottom, the governance structure we're putting in place in the divisions will be supported by our Deputy Commissioner nationally, and make sure that we're making the changes. You will see some of the changes that were taking place in terms of our divisions, and I have a slide there where it shows the changes we've gone from our 6 to 4 divisions. Again, flattening the organisation in many respects, so that the speed and the efficiency in terms of which we do our business will be seen and tangible across the organisation. So we've flattened our regional structure. In addition, we have flattened our divisional structure, so that, as I said, we've moved away from that structure, we'd say, in terms of the district structure, which was very labour intensive, which was very difficult for us to be efficient, we'd say. Moving away from that would help us be more efficient across the organisation. So what our new divisions will look like was our regional assistant commissioners will be in charge of the divisions, the 4 divisions. They will be responsible for making sure that divisions where their capacity or demands exceeds their capacity, we will make sure that they are augmented, supported, and they will get whatever service we need where they don't have the capacity within their divisions. But also we'll make sure that we'll hold them accountable to work within what the Commissioner calls the corporate framework, so we will get consistency in terms of service delivery right across the organisation, regardless where you are. As the Commissioner said, rather than a postcode lottery in terms of policing service, we will guarantee and ensure that we provide an efficient and effective policing service across the organisation. So that will be the role of the regions. The divisions, and I have on my slide there the new divisional structure, and it shows our new footprint across the organisation in the 19 divisions. The purpose of those 19 divisions will be to ensure that each divisional commander will have the capacity, to give that local bespoke policing service. They will have the capacity to provide a range of policing services, which nowadays any modern policing service have to do, because crime is changing, it's going more complex, there's more economic crime, there's more cyber crime, so we want to give the divisions the capacity to be able to do that locally, depending on the local policing demands of their respective divisions, because obviously not all our divisions are the same. We have a very large urban centres and some very large rural areas, so we will give the chief superintendents the autonomy and the capacity to give her that bespoke local policing service within their local communities. So chief superintendents, what can they expect to see, what will the community see within their divisions? We will have a dedicated crime superintendent who will oversee all the serious crime investigations within those respective divisions, so that our frontline superintendents can focus on delivering that frontline policing service, engaging with communities, building with partnerships, what we consider to be so essential in terms of providing safe communities across the entire country. We realise we can't deliver it on our own police. We need to engage with those other partners. And I think taking some of that heavy lifting off the local superintendents, the frontline superintendents, in terms of the crime investigation, in terms of the business support, the HR, the finance, by recruiting new Garda staff with those specific skills, then we will be able to give a better service to our own people internally, so that, as I say, our frontline officers can focus on being tactically aware in terms of what our challenges are within the community. So across the organisation, each division will have, as I said, community engagement superintendents, the performance and assurance superintendent that I mentioned earlier, so that we can be satisfied and you can be satisfied, holding us to account that yes, we will ensure that we learn from our mistakes and we will deliver consistency in terms of our policing service, and to make sure that we have somebody who is looking over the shoulder of all of us within each of those divisions to see, yeah, are we learning from our mistakes in the past, and can we assure you that we're giving the type of policing service that every member of the community should expect, regardless where they are in the community. So that will be the structure of our new divisions, so that the public can expect to see, as I said, more frontline Gardaí out there, and community policing. And we will hear from AC McMahon and shortly, AC McPartland shortly, in terms of what that new community policing structure is going to look like. But that's going to be certainly the central focus on our new policing strategy: more frontline Gardaí, delivering more bespoke community services, and provided with the range of services that they need to provide a modern policing service at the back end from us, supported both regionally, in terms of myself as a regional assistant commissioner, but also supported nationally for the national units, so they will be able to give us the type of excellence of specialist service that we need. But from a corporate perspective, that, you know, we have a corporate strategy, a policing plan, we have the finance, the HR supports that enable every region and every division to give that policing service across the country. That, in a very broad sense, Chair, in a brief encounter here today, is where our operating model is going, what the public can expect to see across the organisation. So my final slide there, I've shown what we announced yesterday in terms of what the makeup of those new regions will be, where the divisional headquarters will be, and where we'll have our new regional chief superintendent's base. So that, Chair, is a very brief summary, and gives time for question and answers today. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mick, and thanks for being so concise. As I said, colleagues have had a chance to have conversations both at Commissioner and other levels about this over the last couple of months. So anybody want to ask a brief question? I have one or two, but no? Bob? No?
I suppose the question that you suggest yourself, Michael, is the issue of, in a context of autonomy, maintaining core consistency. Of course, there'll be variances depending on the particular circumstances of each division. But where does the policy making and policy implementation evaluation sit to look at that consistency across the organisation?
Well, maybe I can help with that. What I've created is, in effect, units, autonomous units for operational purposes. And I think then, you know, things like finance, HR, the way in which we go about our business. So, in effect, what is our policy dealing with missing persons, or what is our policy around the investigation of, say, domestic abuse? Those should be set at a corporate standard. Our standards of investigation of homicides, they should have a corporate standard, and there should be an understanding then of when a district, in effect, put its hand up and say, you know, we're dealing with a linked series here, or we're dealing with a difficult case, we need national help in respect of that. And so the Chief Superintendent, the Divisional Officer, will have autonomy within the policing plan, and they're still, you know, they will have a local policing plan, but they will also have a national policing plan to deliver on as well, and the priorities which are set here and then delivered and recognised then through the policing plan. So it's just not, in effect, setting up 19 mini services. There's a lot of the work, you know, that hopefully we can simplify by looking after the HR and the finance policy, whilst at the same time giving them HR and a finance person on the ground with them to help them in the day-to-day running of what is a big business unit in effect. So what we're really sort of trying to achieve here is that decisions are made at the appropriate place, and a lot of decisions around operational delivery should be made at a very local level and at an appropriate level. And that doesn't mean the Chief Superintendent makes all those decisions. That's about sergeants and inspectors and indeed guards making those decisions as well. We're trying to just sort of invert this sort of culture piece that things are sent up for clarification or confirmation or concurrence, as opposed to actually, giving a further direction. People know what to do. I want to give them the freedom to get on and do it. And that's what I mean within a corporate framework. We're setting a corporate framework. Here are the standards. Please apply them in your local setting.
Thanks.
Thanks. Commissioner, we were struck, I think, when we discussed this before, and you referenced it here, 126 units down to 19, and the removal of an entire industry of administration that goes on in order to maintain 124, is it, whatever.
Yeah.
I suppose one thing that drives that kind of referral upwards that you described in your response to Bob is not being clear about what to do and being afraid of making a mistake. In all organisations, not necessarily, not exclusively in the Guards. So I suppose I'd like to hear a little bit about how you will reassure these divisions and, as you said, superintendents, inspectors and guards that will be empowered to make decisions, that they should actually make them and not refer it upwards.
Well, I think it's based around about the clarity of the job description, and people are presuming what's going to be in, and people are worrying about their HR processes. Actually, the HR processes will be owned by the organisation. What we'll ask people to do is not invent their own, but just implement and professionally implement our own procedures properly. The Chief Superintendents themselves, Chief Superintendents Association, have said, there's a piece around just their development and their career and professional development in respect of this, and we'll have to consider how best to do that, because that may just be as simple as mentoring, peer-to-peer support, with some training input as well. But the clarity of what the role entails. So, there's concern about, in effect, taking the district level out, and so a district superintendent, as is now, may move, and an inspector will replace them. But the inspector's replacing them for the purpose of community policing. The inspector's not going to be responsible for all crime in that area, because we'll have a detective superintendent responsible for that. They're not going to be responsible for the administration, because we'll have administration here led by an assistant principal. They can concentrate on their local area and the bespoke needs of that in terms of delivering community policing, because somewhere else we will have an inspector on 24/7 within the 5-unit system, and that's another improvement that we're able to do. Just by taking out the administrative units, and we're losing in terms of this about 100 administrative units. You free people up, and because there's fewer divisions, then you're able then to multiply up what you're doing in comparison, either trying to deliver that across 96 divisions, which is impossible, or even across 96 districts or 28 divisions. That's impossible. A lot more can be done when you're thinking of 19 divisions. So there's clarity around the job description. I don't want people getting ahead of themselves and thinking what those job descriptions are, but we're not in effect just saying, okay, we're taking a superintendent out and they'll be replaced by an inspector. The job will have changed entirely, and it's just that clarity then for the organisation. At the same time, one of the great motivators is giving people responsibility, and people should feel that they have more responsibility and they should have the support of the organisation in terms of taking local action, taking local decisions and dealing with things quickly and properly. And I think, by and large, this is just a matter not of competence, but just in confidence of being supported in doing so. And I can wholeheartedly reassure the organisation that I entirely support the decisions that they're making in support of delivering the policing plan and local policing delivery.
I think that was the point I was getting to, was the confidence that they'll be supported in an organisation that, historically has a discipline at its heart, and sometimes that drives certain behaviours, i.e. sending it upstairs for somebody else to take the decision. So I think that support piece that you referenced is going to be important. Could you give us a sense of what would be different for your typical superintendent that today runs a district? Just what would be different? Because there's been a lot of, I don't know, information floating around. But
well, we would say that we've created an effective administrative tier. So a lot of that administration around the HR issues in particular, so the human resource issues, and also then just the general administration that goes on. And we want to streamline that in any case, but all of this riding from one floor to the other floor will be cut out, because we'll have cut away so many of the administrative units that there is within the organisation. Secondly then, within each division, they're all going to have at least 2 community engagement superintendents, and we really see them as being really important in delivering the local policing service. They're going to be of sufficient rank that can make decisions, and they'll have sufficient individuals within their command that they can actually do something when they go out and make a promise. They're making a promise then that they are able then to deliver upon. With a detective superintendent in each division, and that'll be a new departure for us. So that's a specialist in investigation in crime, and crime will be investigated by all Garda members as it is now, but also then we're putting a conduit in place between the divisions and the national units, whilst putting an individual superintendent, detective superintendent in place who can take charge of the more serious investigations and ensure consistency of approach and a far more corporate and process and system approach to the investigation of serious crime. And that's important as we're receiving out the investigation management system, because we'll be able to do a lot more in terms of linked series, particularly around some of these incidents where we see criminal gangs in effect get involved in violent feuds with each other. We'll be able to link series various events, be it destruction of property, be it serious assault, indeed attempted murder, indeed murder. All of these things, we want to just upscale our ability to take on a more professional approach, facilitated by having the right people plus the ICT. And lastly, we have a superintendent there for governance. We'll deal with a lot of the discipline issues, risk assessment, assist the chief superintendent, some of the very much sort of the policing related skills that are required, but we're taking also those discipline investigations, which take a lot of time. And so a district officer at the moment is weighed down with the responsibilities of all crime. Everything happens in their district, all the administration, and all the other vagaries of discipline investigations and HR issues that may fall upon them. And actually, I think whenever you crowd all that into that, the actual amount of delivery of local policing is limited. And is forced, because there's only so many hours in a day we can expect people to work, and we've narrowed the ground in which they can actually deliver local policing. We're trying to reverse that through systems and processes. We're putting people in specific responsibilities for some of these additional matters.
thank you. And just one final question, and it relates to your most recent announcement and AC Finn's final slide. Could you give us some sense of the rationale around the decisions you were making about district headquarters or divisional headquarters?
Well, the rationale around that is, one, that we've worked in concert with the regional ACs. They've consulted with the existing chief superintendents who are divisional officers. We've looked at various factors, and I would include the characteristics of the particular division. So where is the concentrations that we'd see around population? It's also about being strategically placed within a division as well, in terms of major events, strategic locations, local government, etc. But then beyond that, then this is only the starting point. The next point is then where do we situate the superintendents? Because contrary to some commentary, we have explicitly said that this will not draw all the other superintendents and ancillary into where the chief superintendent is. And to call it the divisional headquarters in some ways a bit of a misnomer. It may be where the divisional officer is, but we would see that we want to keep our superintendents diffused out through these divisions. So we've made decisions based on our consultation really with the chief superintendents and the ACs these are their suggestions. At the centre, we've run a ruler over them just to be sure of coherence going forward, and we've come to a final determination upon that based on what we know of these areas, our professional opinion, and those other factors then that have brought into play. And yes, some areas have lost a divisional headquarters as it is at the moment. We've tried to our best, we will make sure that there's still a superintendent in those areas still, and the chief superintendent will still be available. They will be on the phone.
In each of the divisional headquarters, and I take your point about a misnomer, but I'll use it for the moment, are they already, suitably, do they have suitable buildings already, or is this going to take time?
Well, there's only one where we require, in effect, building, and that's Macroom. And we've had to compromise. And that was mentioned in your report this morning. Yeah, it's compromised on Bandon at the moment. Is there one other where we require building? Portlaoise. Portlaoise is an older building, but it is subject to a rebuild in effect. But now we've decided that that's going to be where the divisional officer is going to be. We can be far clever around the spec of that, the specification of that building.
Thank you. Molling, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, just an observation. Assistant Commissioner Finn made the point that the current structure and processes are reflective of the fact that the organisation is 100 years old, and really there hasn't been significant change since then. What's proposed here is a huge change in terms of organisation structure, process, personnel, and notably culture. International experience would suggest that a change of that dimension in the public sector would usually necessitate quite a considerable period of time for it to be embedded. Some research would suggest up to 10 years for something of that nature. How confident are you that the type of changes can be embedded in a significantly shorter period?
How many years did you suggest? 10? Oh well, you know what my tenure is, so I have a lot to do then. I think, do you know what the important thing is for me is that, well, actually the focus on why we're doing this is about service delivery. Like, in the end, this is about us using every euro we get to spend it wisely to make sure we're delivering the maximum in terms of policing service that we provide. There's all the reports that back this up, but there is a responsibility on me as the accounting officer, but more clearly as me as Commissioner and the rest of those who have sought and obtained leadership positions in the organisation to deliver on this. And the quicker we get about this and get on with it, the quicker we'll be able to improve our service and actually be a more efficient service, and therefore then a more effective service in terms of the service delivery that we're providing. And I just think at the moment what concerns me is that there's an inconsistency in the service delivery from one place to the next, and I want to deal with that, and I would like to deal with that quickly. So I've been characterised in some quarters as being impatient, and I am a little impatient. I think there are real positives in terms of service delivery. I think there's real positives in terms of introducing detective superintendents. There's real positives in terms of introducing detective inspectors in our protective services units. There's a real positive in empowering local Gardaí to deliver on local policing, and there's a real imperative that I'm impatient about in terms of delivering on community policing. So there's a lot to be achieved with this. The structural piece and the behavioural piece we can work hard at. The cultural piece always lags behind, but we have to make a start somewhere, and if that's how long it takes, at the same time we want to make a start.
Thanks, Molling. Thank you, Commissioner. As Assistant Commissioner Finn said, the community policing example follows almost logically from that discussion, because it's putting flesh on some of the concepts that you've set out. So I'd like to invite Judith now to lead our conversation on that.
Thanks, Chair. I think we're saving the best wine till the end. Commissioner, you've put a lot of store in the delivery of the community policing framework. It's a long-awaited framework, and the authority welcomes the fact that we've now received it, and there's much to commend in this, but there are many, many challenges as well. And in the document you refer to the need to build an effective community policing culture. So could you just give your assessment of the scale of the challenge of building an effective community policing culture within your organisation?
Well, if I address that question, and then I know Orla will also want to speak to the work that she's led on in respect of this, but I think we have a community policing culture within the organisation. Certainly we have good contact into the community. What we haven't been probably the best at doing is really being able to describe that and actually show the advantages that it brings in terms of policing delivery, the connection to the community and in the service that we provide. Undoubtedly, when I go out and about, I see huge contact and huge confidence between local community and the local guards, and that's almost universal. And we want to build on that, and what we're bringing forward in this framework is the process by which we make sure that nothing in effect falls between the cracks, that we have a clear indication of what the resources will be, what those resources will actually do, and how we'll manage and show governance of those resources in terms of following through on community concerns, and then also then working effectively with other partnerships. So there's governance with this, there's there's providing personnel for it, and then also providing them with suitable training. But we've made commitments within our operating model as to how much of the organisation, how much of each division will be assigned to community policing, and we wish to follow through on those. And given the resource that we're putting into this, so between 50 and 60% of each of the new divisions, then although the plan is ambitious, I think it is achievable. And I think it's particularly achievable as we're not starting from a greenfield site. Already in many places there's a very strong connection. And what we want to do is through freeing up people from the administrative functions and freeing them up through the employment of Garda staff, plus the overall increase of the organisation, repopulate some of the community policing areas that have fallen away just during the times of austerity. So I'm thinking in particular some of the rural stations which we would have visited. We never closed, but we would have visited once or twice a week, repopulating those in terms of individual or dual member being assigned to them. And that's already happened, and that's made a very significant difference. And that's all part of the community policing that we want to see.
I was impressed with your comment in the earlier conversation around the new operating model, that you were kind of inverting the organisation on its head to support frontline service delivery, and that the headquarters and regions would be supporting community policing and
yes.
the divisions. Do you see cultural challenges in that kind of thinking?
Well, I think that comes down to the confidence that we should have in our own personnel. We have really good people, both members and staff, working out there. When you go out around the stations, you see them all the time, and it's just, and in effect they know what to do, and it just has to be made clear to them it's their responsibility then to deliver and just keep on reinforcing those sorts of messages. Yes, I and the regional ACs will be holding the divisional officers to account as to performance, but we have plenty of people in the organisation who know how to connect with the community, know what has to be done, know how to solve problems, and make big investments actually in their local community, not just through their membership of Garda Síochána, but also through their involvement in voluntary work outside of working hours. And so we are in a very, very positive place with this. This is just, in effect, us as an organisation describing what it should be, describing how it should be resourced, and then the governance that goes around that. And I'm very clear that these divisions, and therefore then those within them, they are responsible for the local delivery. No one needs clearance from me for a local operation, and that's an extreme. But a guard or a sergeant really should have the autonomy themselves to deliver on local policing issues, the quality of life issues that they see as they go out and about and patrol and are brought to their attention.
Okay, if I could address some questions around resources then. And in the framework there is a very strong and welcome reliance on data and information driven policing, but our experience as an authority has been that data within the organisation has not been as valued as perhaps it might be. So how are you going to change that, and how are you going to, in particular, resource the analytical capability to support data-driven community policing?
Well, in relation to data, obviously the whole idea of the community policing framework is to empower the community guard. Their area that they have, the community policing area that are all mapped out, or will be all mapped out in all of the divisions, will also have CSO data populated on top of that. So when a community guard goes to look at their area, they will know all of the issues about maybe deprivation, population, gender, employed, unemployed, housing, be it social or private, and all of that. That's one aspect of it. Obviously then our Garda Síochána Analyst Service will provide to them the data they require in relation to issues that arise in their area. And being out there on the ground, they will identify the issues, the policing quality of life issues that need to be addressed, and the customer management system, relationship management system that we will have eventually. We don't have it yet, but we will have that, and that will build up their whole knowledge of the people out there in the community.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the customer or relationship management mapping system, because you don't have that at the moment.
No.
And I suppose our concern in publishing this framework is that you're building expectations that at the moment will be difficult to deliver in the absence of that supporting IT. So how will you manage that in the interim?
Well, it'll be managed. We have one or two divisions who have operated, I suppose, a hybrid system while waiting for a bespoke system to arrive. So it's basically using something like Excel to populate. So it'll be somebody in the back administration end populating all of the calls that come in and the issues that arise, and the address, obviously the customer, whoever the person is, the injured party. So they build up, I suppose, a knowledge of all the people there. And I would expect in the divisions, the community engagement superintendents will be in charge of that. They'll be looking at that and seeing where are there issues. Do they need to move people to different places? And that's how they'll build it up for the moment. Obviously, it's not the ideal situation, but sometimes we have to make do.
And do you see any risks in having an additional IT system standalone within divisions that's separate from CAD, Pulse, etc.?
Well, these are different. I mean, if someone makes a call and it's either a crime issue, that'll obviously go on to Pulse. I'm talking more about, as the Commissioner refers to, as the quality of life issues, which are maybe just talking about in an area that there's a lot of young people playing football in the green in front of the houses, and sometimes that impacts on people's quality of life. That may not go on, the Guard may find that out just on their way. It may not go on Pulse, but they will note it on their I suppose, system that they have at the moment for managing it. And obviously it will report back into the community engagement superintendent at their monthly or weekly or fortnightly meetings, depending on what they decide in the division.
No, I appreciate it's a suboptimal position when you don't have the IT, the ideal IT system to support it, but I suppose my concern is around the framework is now rolling out. You're making these commitments to the public that you will track issues end to end until they are resolved, but really you're working with a system that is way below what you really need. And on the point of building expectations, you're also saying you're going to have a dedicated, visible, accessible, familiar community policing team in each of these community policing areas. But what happens when there's a crisis and they're withdrawn to deal with a high-profile visit or whatever it might be, and you've built this expectation that they're going to be available to deal with those local quality of life issues?
Well, I suppose a policing service by its very nature has to deal with crisis issues all the time, and absolutely I wouldn't be going out and telling my community that I'm going to be there 24/7. Something will happen someday that you'll be called to something else. But then, by the same token, a community guard isn't working 24/7. They're going to have rest days and holidays, and that's the whole idea of having the back office, the people there who will be able to deal with it. So if somebody rings in a particular community and looking for whoever their local community guard is, they'll be able to be told that they're either on rest days or they're away. If it's something that requires a policing response immediately, obviously it will go to the normal policing units. Otherwise, it can wait until the guard comes back and they will go out and visit the person then.
And do you have some sort of model that will allow you to map the resources that you need to the times of peak demand, so that your community policing teams won't be working 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, for example, but they'll be available when the peak demand is, like at weekends and evenings, 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. kind of thing?
Absolutely, they're not going to be like office hours. The only people who do office hours are the back office staff who look after, and that will be clearly communicated to communities that they will only man the office Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 for the most part. But obviously you still have the Garda station that if it's open, or a person out in the car, they will work regular hours. And as it develops, at the moment, as you said, we've rolled it out in the 4 divisional policing models, and that will be evaluated at the end of Q1 next year. And I'm quite sure, like with any new system, there will be tweaks made to it, and we'll discover issues that have arisen that we didn't anticipate in designing it. But by the same token, I suppose, if we don't try, we won't achieve.
Okay.
Can I just touch upon the rosters there just very quickly, because it is important within this. So under our policing service for the future, we have to review rosters. We've got to a position of we have a management position, I think, and now we want to take that forward in terms of discussion with the associations. But part of this is, there is a sense that our resources aren't quite with us at the right time, and we would like to address that as best we can. So that's part of the work which will be undertaken through the autumn and into the spring of next year. Okay,
and I'm glad you mentioned the Commission, because obviously there's a big piece of work to be done around community safety and the interagency work around that, and the framework does refer frequently to the need for working in partnership and the need for multi-agency working. And given that you're starting to work in this framework now, in the absence of supporting legislation, how do you see partnership working around things like, you said, the young people kicking a ball in a park, or the litter, or broken glass, or the overgrown hedges, or the dog dirt, or the graffiti, or the rats, whatever it might be, that are not necessarily policing issues, but yet impact on people's quality of life and feelings of safety? So how will that work in the absence of a framework of legislation? Well,
we have that already. It exists in community policing out there, local policing. I know from my operational experience that we would work with the local authority very closely in relation to issues like that. And you mentioned something like dog fouling, which isn't our problem, but it is a problem. And we would, if we got that as a call, obviously we'd hand it over to our local authority colleagues, and we would work with the rest of the statutory bodies on a regular basis. And I suppose legislation will put that on a legislative footing, but we still work with our colleagues in the various other state agencies as and when it's required.
But I think having the support function as well is important, because we'll have somebody there 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, to chase down on the other agencies. I think it's very difficult for a guard who's on shifts and maybe working Saturday and Sunday, whereas the other agencies are often 9 to 5. So one of the advantages that we've seen where we have had the support function is that they're able to chase things through. And we have their local policing forums, as Orla's referred to, and they do seem to be successful. The legislation, even just a more strategic intent by other agencies and built into their business plans would be a good start, even before we get to a place of legislation. And so I think that would be nearly the first step, a recognition of what we want to achieve in terms of outcomes, and then how best we can each deliver on that. Because certainly I think when you look at the number of state players there are in certain places and dealing with certain people, there are efficiencies in terms of reducing demand if we work better together, and that hopefully that sense of collaboration will require legislation initially in any case.
I'm just conscious of time, but I have 2 or 3 more very quick questions, if I may. How can you be sure that you will have the very best talent in your organisation represented in your community policing teams, and you'll retain that talent? Because inevitably people will move on or get promoted, so how can you be sure that you can have a good representation of the very best talent in the organisation within those teams?
Well, I know that in relation to the 4 divisions that it has currently been rolled out, and competitions were held for people to go into community policing. So it wasn't just it was a competition, and obviously certain competencies were expected of the applicants. So people are chosen no more than a competition for any other specialised area to go into those units. So I would be confident that the right people for community policing will go into it, because it does demand a certain, I suppose, skill level. People have to be good at interacting with their communities and problem solving as well too. So that's important.
And does that go for the Garda staff in the support office as well? Has there been a selection process for them?
I am not 100% aware was there a selection process in relation to that, because I know that we have suggested to people, particularly in country divisions, that they might use their victim services office staff to, at a start, to see how much volume of work they have, and that they could do that, and it complements the other work they do in relation to victims anyway, and that they would manage the email address for the community guards and the stuff that's coming in that way.
Because you really need the right people in that function.
Absolutely.
As well. Okay, and just two final questions. Is there going to be an implementation plan? Because this is obviously a marathon rather than a sprint, so it's going to take some time to implement. So will we see a phased implementation plan, and how will you measure success? Those are my last questions.
Well, we're meeting actually with the chiefs and superintendents from the 4 divisions that have just commenced it tomorrow to talk to them, and we're commencing a rollout of training from the divisional officer right down to the community guards, and it's starting this coming month. It will start in Dublin, and then it'll move to the other divisions as well too. And obviously we will learn from that as to what works and what doesn't, and it'll be blended. Some classroom, a lot of online as well too, and then for every other Garda member who isn't a community police person, they will get some videos that will be used during the crossover period in the tours where they have an overlap, and there'll be about 10 5-minute videos that will show them what the community guards are doing as well too.
And how will you measure success then?
I suppose a satisfied community, a happy community, and I suppose the public attitude survey should still continue to show the high levels of satisfaction.
Will you use any other tools apart from the public?
Well, obviously the community engagement superintendents will be in charge of the community police in their particular divisions and areas, and we will be looking to them to ensure that the success, and I suppose the fact that every problem that's arrives at the door of the community guards is finished to conclusion is a measure of the success involved.
I think it's a conversation we'll probably want to continue in committee, because time doesn't allow me to ask anything further. Thank you very much, and I wish you every success with the framework.
Thank you.
Likewise, Assistant Commissioner and indeed Commissioner, we wish you every success with this new strategy, and we look forward to having sight of the evaluation next quarter. I suppose behind Judith's question is a concern that the public attitude survey, if you were using that as a reason for doing this, you wouldn't do it at all, because you've got strong numbers there already. So that's not going to go much higher. So you will need to think, I think, in a more extensive way about how to measure success with this approach. And we just leave that with you. We're not asking you to answer it now, but I think part of the evaluation you might have in mind, how will you know if it's made a difference, given that your public attitude numbers are already so high. You could, in fact, as I say, not do this at all. There was 2 AOB items, Commissioner, and they're only down for, as I indicated to you in advance, a 2-liner. We're expecting to conclude our engagement with you on the homicide review at the November meeting in public, and I just want to confirm that that's on target for that with a final report.
Chairperson, the final report we expect to have in November. Each person involved in on the team have to have any final. There's a few, I suppose, things that have to be just confirmed. They have to have their final reports in by the end of this month, so we would expect. Not the end of this month. Apologies.
We'll have it in lots of time.
No, the end of October. Apologies, and then in November to have.
But give us a bit of time in advance of the November meeting.
And
please.
there is a meeting next week at 8 a.m. if anyone from the authority wants to come out to it, and that will settle a lot of the questions that we have today.
Thank you. And then the final item was it's just a quick one-liner. We had some concerns earlier in the year about progress in relation to driver training. I suppose we were expecting to see some developments since, and I just want to know where you're at.
Yep. If I can just break it down into just 4 quadrants, really. The first part is policy and procedures. We've we've involved ourselves in a complete overhaul of driver training, and that included restructuring of the courses. In addition to that as well, we have moved considerably, I suppose, to make our services compatible with the ESDS standard of training, without having to impact on the standards of delivery that's currently done. In respect of the resourcing demand, then what we've looked at in the context of that is that the new training model will align itself with the performance of the vehicles, and also what is currently best practice both in the PSNI and in GB. And then what we've looked at, and there was another working group that looking at the purchasing, the specification and the allocation of vehicles that will align itself then to that training and policy. And lastly then, under that piece of it is to try and make sure that we have one organisation, that the training that we provide to the Garda staff will also, Garda members will also be provided to the Garda staff members at the same level. In order to achieve the civilianisation process, we have had we do need over a short period of time to front load some additional driver training, and the application for that will be out in the organisation within the next week. And what we're trying to achieve then is a balance of 1 to 2 of Garda staff versus contractors or persons in. I gave you figures before in respect of that currently there's about 82% of all our driver training is governed by what we currently know as CBD2. So that's the standard thing. So really we have a small outside of that, we really don't have much thing for other things, but it's very small in some areas. At the moment, what we're doing with the CBD2, and really we put no investment into it since 2010, but in that period of time, the max that we're getting out in CBD2 is 460 per year. The current shortfall at the moment that urgently requires attention is 481. So even if we were to do nothing, we'll only clear that backlog.
Okay, that was the focus of our concern, if you recall, was that the organisation is growing, the capacity to deliver the training is static or shrinking, and so it's really, I mean, we're not going to discuss it now, it's very late, but maybe you could send us a note on it, Dave?
It's actually with you today, this morning, unfortunately.
This morning?
Well, no, yeah, I can't explain how it didn't get it before now, it's done.
This agenda was published a week ago.
I know, but can I just say as well, and what's important for put it on record, is that there's currently a tender on e-tenders at the moment with a view to fully outsourcing the end-to-end for the ESDS level 1, and also then for the augmentation for support services of ESD level 2. And what that will mean is that instead of 460 per year, we'll probably be able to drive out 1,500 courses per year once we get it up and running.
Okay, that's what we want to hear. So I'll have a look at the note when I get back to the office.
Yes.
And if I have any further questions, I'll follow up.
Yes,
or if
please, yes.
Either in committee with colleagues or directly with yourself.
Okay, no problem.
All right?
Yep.
Thank you very much. Just 2 or 3 concluding remarks. There's a few data matters we're going to follow up on, just to note those. And we're going to follow up in relation to the Code of Ethics. We also look forward to getting your assault strategy in due course.
Yep.
Something I should have mentioned when we were discussing the Youth Diversion Programme, Commissioner, you will recall that we asked at the time whether similar behaviours might exist in relation to adult cases. So we decided this morning that we're going to carry out a piece of work in the authority in relation to the adult caution scheme, because it's the nearest parallel, if you like, to the juvenile diversion programme. So it's just to confirm that we're going to do a piece of work in that area in the coming months to assure ourselves in relation to the nearest parallel we can find to the juvenile diversion programme. And finally, Commissioner, and I know it's very late, so you can be as brief or as long as you wish. We were mindful this morning that this is your anniversary in appearing in public before the authority, your first anniversary, because your first meeting with the authority was September last year. And so we were wondering if there was any reflection you'd like to share in concluding the meeting with, in terms of 1 year on, and as you referenced yourself, your tenure earlier, looking ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, I would just, I think, reiterate what I've often said to people, that this is a real privilege to hold this particular position. It's very enjoyable work, it's hard work, but I have the privilege to be in charge of an organisation which is filled with really good people who do want to do a good job. And part of my responsibility is just to make sure we put the systems, processes and structures which actually allows them to get on with that work. So in the last year, with the assistance of my colleagues and others, you know, a roadmap has been set out for the next couple of years around the delivery of the policing service for the future, and I genuinely believe that's going to make a difference in terms of the quality of the policing service that we provide. So a year in, and I think what that tells me is just how quickly a year can pass, and therefore then not to let the grass grow under my feet. If I want to see this done in my tenure, I need to keep on pushing on at this. We have done enough analysis and consideration of the big principles. We now need to get down to the actual detail and practicality of the implementation. So, and that's where we are at the moment, and indeed some of that very detailed work is the hard work. In terms of just internally, I would like to see an organisation which grows in confidence in itself, in confidence in its own performance, and its confidence in terms of its behaviours. And that also means addressing behaviours which fall below standards within the organisation, and people have the courage to speak up and do that, and managers as well take the proper and corrective action when they see it happening in front of them. I think all of these matters will occur in an organisation of this size. Regrettable things will happen, but it's for us to deal with those quickly and decisively, and then move on. And that's part of the culture that I want to see further develop in the organisation. But I feel we're in a strong place. All the major building blocks are there in terms of public confidence, the support that we enjoy, the amount of information that comes in from the public, but also then in terms of the people that we have. The next building blocks to put in place are simply the structures and the systems and processes. And if it's all about the people, what we've left to sort out is the plumbing, really. Thank you.
Well, we wish you well with that. Thank you very much. We're adjourned until the next meeting in October. Thank you.